Little Tommy and the Big Problem,
aka The Recession of the 2008.
By Morgan Linford, Sarah Fong, Caitlin Adams, and Michelle Satar. Upon a time, our wonderful Congress created a law that would keep our country out of a recession. Unfortunately, when our country grew older, we pushed aside the law that had kept us safe for so many years. We believed that we were big and strong enough to manage our economic problems on our own without the help of an old bucket shop law. Boy, were we wrong. Here's the story of little Tommy and how our economy got turned upside down.
Little Tommy was buying his first house ever. Even though he had worked so hard when he was younger, he still spent many years wondering how he would ever have enough money to pay for so much of a house all at once. Then one day, Tommy heard that he only had to put down less than 3% of what the actual house cost. He was so excited. Now he could buy the house of his dreams. He rushed to Sally Sellers so she could sell him a house. He was thrilled to find out that he only had to pay $12,000 for his fancy $400,000.
Meanwhile, Billy Banker, who had given Tommy the loan for the rest of his house, was busy counting out his cash after selling portions of the mortgage to Amelia Ingrid Giraldo, who goes by AIG for short. AIG convinced all her friends to invest in little Tommy's mortgage. She split up the mortgage by grades and told her friends which investment would be the most scary, but it would make them the most money, and which would be the safest, but make them the least money. All of her friends joined in and picked it.
Poor little Tommy unknowingly had an adjustable rate mortgage. This means that the price of his house could change each month and every month. Eventually, this made it so Tommy could no longer afford his house and had to walk away from it. One day, little Tommy ran into an old friend of his, Nellie No, who bought a house at the same time Tommy did. As it turns out, Nellie had an adjustable rate mortgage too. She had to walk away from her house. Little Tommy was shocked. He didn't understand why it was the whole economy seemed to be falling apart. Luckily, Nellie No.
To make it super simple for little Tommy, Nellie split up the recession into three main parts. The first part was all of the economic reasons. She first explained about adjustable rate mortgages and the problems with them. She told Tommy that when a person has an adjustable rate mortgage, the price of their house is subject to change at any time. This is bad because while Tommy may have only had to pay 1% in interest before, at any time it could jump to a higher percentage and leave Tommy scrambling for money. She told him that having a fixed-rate mortgage would be a much smarter thing to have. At the time, Tommy didn't know what he was getting himself into. He had no idea that he could possibly be paying up to 8% interest on the mortgage or even more. Another economic problem that Nellie explained was credit default swaps. Credit default swaps are basically insurance policies between the buyer and seller and the loan involved. It was a way for the buyer to make money without losing too much. Nellie explained to Tommy that this affects mainly the investors more than little Tommy, but in the end, it has a major part to do with our economy. After Tommy and millions of the other people walked away from their houses, there was then a shortage of demand. Little Nellie told Tommy that shortage of demand is when the demand for something is high and there's not enough supplied. Economic shortages are set by price. When the price of something is set lower than the going price, then it involves a shortage. In this case, most people needed houses, but there was a shortage. The economic factors took a major toll in the recession of 2008. It took the property of little Tommy and millions of others.
Next, Nellie explained the social reasons. She talked about the desire people had for short-run money. Short-run money is a period of time in which the quantity of some inputs can't be increased more than a specific amount. This is referring to fixed-rate mortgages. Nellie went on to tell Tommy that no one had wanted a fixed-rate mortgage and had instead taken out an adjustable-rate mortgage. Tommy had not realized how much of a problem these mortgages had caused. Nellie then went on to explain the problems with the idea that everyone should own a house. She explained to Tommy that when the mad rush of people with the desire to buy a house came in, Billy Bank offered these people huge loans and then sold them to AIG, who loaned out the mortgages to investors who placed bets on whether or not the homeowners would actually pay their mortgages. Nellie told Tommy that when all of this happened, it seemed as if the people who bought houses were not at a high risk of not paying their bills. However, the investors were shocked to learn that the homemakers had only invested a very small amount into their homes. And so instead of taking out more loans or refinancing, the homeowners would just walk away from their houses, just like Tommy and Nellie had done. The last thing from the social viewpoint that Nellie explained was eliminating inherent investment risks. This, Nellie explained, was due to bank bailouts. When the homeowners quit paying their mortgages, the banks were in trouble. This made it so the government had had to pay to bail them out because if they didn't, the whole country would fail. The banks were too big to let fail. If they failed, everyone in the country would not be able to use credit cards for anything, and they'd have to resort to using cash. Nellie explained to Tommy that people don't have enough money in cash, so they wouldn't spend as much money, causing other companies to fail.
Finally, Nellie explained the political reasons. She said that one of the topics is how the HUD lends money to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to create mortgages for poor people. Nellie went on to tell Tommy that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are two of the largest government-sponsored companies of the housing finance department in the United States. How these two companies fund these mortgages is by loaning loans from primary market mortgage originators and holding the loans, which are later sold in the capital markets. Nellie then said that HUD is the regulator for Fannie and Freddie, meaning that their job is to set a minimum percentage of business goals for their mortgage price purchases and to encourage mortgage originators to make more affordable lending for lower income and minority families. Nellie then explained the Regulator Investment Modernization Act. She explained that this talks about how investment companies should be less regulated on things like the net capital losses, investment in commodities, limit the penalties for failures of their gross income, and many more. The next thing Nellie described in this topic is President Clinton's last law, which was the bucket shop law. Nellie told Tommy that this law made it so people couldn't bet on other people's derivatives. However, the 1905 law repealed on this law, which then made it legal for people to buy bets on other people's stocks, which unfortunately led to the recession. Nellie explained that throughout history there has been so many mistakes that our country has not learned from and fixed. This is why so many people wonder why Republicans do not change the way they function, because it would essentially take the United States out of this troublesome recession.
Tommy was astounded by all the information he had been given. He still wanted to know what exactly the government was currently doing to try and help. Nellie set right in on explaining. She explained the government has set up a program called Troubled Asset Relief Program, also known as TARP. TARP is a program that allows the U.S. Treasury the power to buy out mortgages and bail out the different companies. They were given $700 billion to give up the companies so that the companies would be able to stay alive. The government hoped that it would unseize the market and keep us out of a horrible recession. The money went to bail out the banks. All of the horrible things that they did was all taken care of the government, and the banks and investors walked away okay. The money in the U.S. Treasury was split up into thirds. The way they could bail out these people, or these out in stages. In the second bailout, the government saved many troubled mortgages. All of the people lost their homes, but the banks and investors came out okay. The government also saved GM, or General Motors. They started off as one of the leading car manufacturers, but ended up in big trouble. Lucky for them, the government loaned them $51 billion to help keep them from dying. They only paid back $23 billion of it, though. Wow, Tommy thought. These companies would have all been gone if it weren't for the government just giving them money.
So it all started out with someone like little Tommy wanting to buy a house. So little Tommy went over and he went to the bank. So we're going to draw a big bank and we're going to label it with a B. And he had to get a loan from the bank because he didn't have enough money to buy his big old house. So the bank gave him an adjustable rate mortgage, which is basically just a loan that can have an interest rate that'll go up and down, doesn't really stay the same. And the bank didn't want to keep that in its own, so he decided to sell it to a big old company called AIG. And AIG, of course, wanted to make money on their own, so they split them up in two grades, all the way from AAA down to triple B minus, right? And they sold it to big investors. So our big investor is going to be our big old fat man here, because he's nice and greedy and wanted to get as much money out of it as possible. Well, then the problem was the adjustable rate mortgage can change, and it'd go up more than down, which would mean that little Tommy couldn't afford it. So little Tommy didn't have the money to pay the bank didn't have the money to pay AIG, and AIG didn't have money for the investors, which meant it was bad, and the whole economy crashed.
In the end, little Tommy felt completely overwhelmed after hearing about all the causes of our current economic crisis. The recession of 2008 took a toll on millions of people, teaching homeowners a huge lesson. Little Tommy told Nellie that he was ready to start over, this time making all the right decisions. Though, in reality, fixing our economic crisis isn't just up to little Tommy, but everyone in our country. This means that changes would have to take place everywhere in the U.S. to get out. First things first, the Congress should realize that this all started by getting rid of the old bucket shop law, and that recreating it would be the first thing to do to help our economy. With that law in place, investors couldn't cheat on our economy for their own personal reason. Reinstating this law is crucial. Secondly, people would need to have sources available to them so they can make smarter decisions while buying homes. Having adjustable rate mortgages is a big risk that can lead to destruction. Fixed rate mortgages are a safe way of going without any risk. Also, the government started bailing the banks out when the homeowners quit paying their mortgages. Unfortunately, if we had let the banks collapse, the whole country would have fallen apart. So how do we fix this mess?
Well, one way of solving this issue is by creating smaller payments over a course of longer periods so that the homeowners would be able to afford it and not lose their properties. Another major factor that needs to be fixed is having stricter laws on regulators. They should do their job and be stricter and enforce rules that would not let the companies cheat the system. Also, the people that the presidents appoint to be their advisors need to change. We need to elect a person with a strong background in economics that does not have anything to do with large companies. Another law that should be strictly enforced is banning people to make bets on derivatives and playing games with the market. Our economy should not have to be brought to ruins because of people's selfless decisions. With some adjustment and stricter enforcement, our economy can be built back up to be at its peak.